Hey everybody, Nick here, and today I got a disassembly for you on this little guy right here. This is the Sandrin Knives Torino, but this time it's using a actual set of carbon fiber scales rather than the plastic mess that it was using the first time. So let's go ahead and take it apart. In practice, I don't think this is going to be any different than the plastic version in construction, but I do want to take a check, get in there. And this also gives me a moment to talk a little bit about the knife itself. So the Torino was actually really interesting. The original version, let me give some context here. The original version of this knife looked like this, which had it was the lowest end looking high-end knife I have ever had on my channel. And I say that not as like a knock on Sandrin or anything like that, but just as a simple fact, I think. For a lot of people, that read very low end. But what was interesting about it is that a lot of people actually really liked it. And maybe more than I would have expected. I'm not by any means diminishing their taste or anything. For a lot of people, that had the real feeling of this is a daily tool I can use and beat on. And I get that, right? But at another level, for a lot of collectors, it rang very hollow. And I think this knife here is an exact reaction to that. This is Sandrin saying to collectors, okay, yeah, you didn't care for that one? Fine. We got one for you. And this is indeed for me. Well, not for me, but for the folks like me who said, no, not really, try again. And indeed they did. And you know what? That's kind of cool. I appreciate that. I applaud it, frankly. So, let's see here. Let's start getting things loose in here. The carbon fiber is not wanting to come off of this back stud. I'm using this little spudger tool here to try and kind of pop things loose. Trying to keep the blade sort of out of play so I don't have to worry about it, but just getting in there a little bit. Yeah, it feels like I'm separating little by little here. So just if I keep that up a couple more rounds, there is a spring in there involved in this recoil lock, so I want to be careful that that doesn't go flying across the room. By saying that, I've increased the chances that it's going to go flying across the room 1,000-fold. But, nonetheless, it's there, it's a thing. But yeah, my goal here is just to sort of very gently walk this up off the knife. Get this carbon fiber off the bottom there. Can I get this guy loose? There we go. Okay, and hey, the spring did not go flying across the room. That's bizarre. But I'll take it. Okay, so what we see here is the construction of this knife is very simple and is indeed, it feels like, very similar to the original. Where we have here is a set of steel washers on top of the material, in this case carbon fiber, in that case plastic. The washers are very, very thin, and in fact we see them cupping a little bit already. That's something that is a little concerning sometimes. The Spyderco Advocate originally started off with very thin washers that kind of cupped up, and after a while, so I want to be very careful not to over-tighten the pivot, or else that could be more of an issue down the road. But, so there's that. And we see how this, I believe it's called the recoil lock works. Is it the recoil lock? Am I making that up? Either way, it's a Sneck tan design. It's based on the Super Lock, I think. Either way, it's a cool locking mechanism, so we'll see how that works as I'm putting it back together here. I'm just cleaning this off. I don't know if I already plugged nickshabazz.com/tools, but I'll go ahead and do so now. It's a place where you can see all the tools that I'm using for this and any other disassembly that I do. I do like the red version here. The red backspacer, I think, adds backspacer/lock bar, adds something to the process here. And, the knife on the whole, it looks pretty great. This is good carbon fiber. It's well done. I feel like the blade finish is still going to be... It's still going to be a thing that I think a lot of people aren't in favor of. They're trying to keep a price point, but for $300, yikes. That's definitely still going to be there. And there were a couple of other issues that they didn't really change from the original Torino. So in some ways, it feels very much like a cosmetic change, more than it does a revision of the knife. That's fine. That's their prerogative, of course. But nonetheless, so we'll go on ahead and we'll put this guy back in position. I'm going to go on ahead and take some 10 weight nano oil. I'm going to lubricate the bearings there. Lubricate the bearing race. And just rotate those bearings around. Spread that oil out a little bit. Also going to put a little bit of oil onto the pivot here. Beautiful. Okay, next up here, what am I doing? What I'm going to do, actually, is I'm going to put the lock here in place. And so what we see here is I'll put the lock and the blade in place. With the blade in place, we can see how this lock works. When the lock is all the way forward, when it's locked forward, and there's usually a spring in here that's pushing the lock forward. When the lock is all the way forward, there's a little piece of metal, basically, between the lock, between the blade and the stop pin, which prevents the blade from moving any further. But when you pull this back, it allows the blade to rotate out of the way. And then eventually the... where is it hitting? Is it hitting the actual... Oh, no, there's a stop pin that's in place. This stop pin is where the blade itself hits. But anyways, but that's how this lock works, right? When the knife is locked, the lock is in this position. When it's unlocked, it can come back so the blade can swing freely. It's a very simple thing, but it works. It's done well. It's a nice approach. Durability-wise, it's sort of in that class of lock. At least, again, I haven't done much testing, but it's in that class of lock that I think for non-abusive work will be absolutely good to go for everybody, roughly. But nonetheless, it's a thing. I do want to get this spring seated, and the way I'm going to do that is by holding it down with one finger and just using this spudger to kind of put it in place. I wanted to make sure that it is seated around this little nubbin inside there, because otherwise it's going to want to yeet itself off into orbit, and I don't need that. And then let's go ahead and put this on here, and I'm just going to kind of slip that on quickly with the hope that it's going to keep that spring in place. Okay, I got a bunch of things out of alignment here. We got a problem. So one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to pull the lock back, and that should allow me to get more things into alignment. With the lock in place, the knife may not be able to fully get everything aligned. So, yeah, doing that is going to be, I think, helpful for me. The other thing that's going to be helpful is not to pinch one of the washers there. So, unfortunately, I screwed up, and I need to get everything back together again. This washer, and unfortunately, this is the downside to having very, very thin washers, just in that process, kind of deformed a little bit. Right? When I put it back into place, it'll reform, but that's a very, very thin washer. I don't know what they're accomplishing by using a washer that thin, but that's disappointing. It will dish itself back into proper positioning here soon, but oof, that's thin. So I'll go ahead and I'll snap everything back together here again. Yeah, the washer is seated around the pivot now. Yeah, okay, everything's popped back through. Now what I can do is kind of pinch everything shut, and hopefully everything will work fine. Yeah, those super thin washers are always a little creepy to me. This is the kind of thing that the reason why I do my disassemblies, right, is because that's a thing. That's not something I necessarily would have expected. And, you know, it's something that I think could be improved in the future. Is it likely to cause a major problem? No, probably not, but it has in other knives, like the Spyderco Advocate in the past. By the way, they did a second revision that fixed that issue, but still, you know, it's good to see the inside, right? The inside can have good surprises, and it can have not so good surprises. I also do want to make sure that my spring is still in place. The way I can tell that is if I, you know, open the blade the rest of the way and the thing goes forward. It did. Yep, I have a spring in place. That's good. I feel like I might have over-tightened this last part, because if I have that too tight, it's probably going to pinch down on the lock bar and cause some troubles. But whatever. Okay, let's go ahead and tighten this little bit right here. And we should be pretty much good to go here. Loosen that just a scotch. Okay. There is no blade play here. There is a little bit of vertical play there. Is that really? Tiniest little bit of vertical play. Why is that the case? Is there horizontal play? Maybe a little tiny bit. Let me tighten this pivot slightly. That is T8. Yeah, just tighten that slightly. Okay. Next question is, maybe we need a little bit more spring action, which is making me think this is too tight, because if this is too tight, it's going to pinch on the lock bar a little bit, which is going to keep the spring from doing its job as effectively. So there's that. Okay. Right now, it is not quite centered anymore. That's kind of understandable, given the crunching that washer just got, which I'm really not a fan of. Did that stop pin go back in? It did. Okay. There is some vertical play here. Why is there vertical play here? If I push this the rest of the way forward, there is no longer vertical play. Could it be that something is out of alignment here subtly? It probably isn't to do with the blade itself. The washer shouldn't play a role here. The pivot is in good position. Let me tighten the pivot a little bit more here. That'll help get that washer a little bit more seated. Okay. Centering's better. Is that actually vertical play? The real question becomes, did the Torino have it, or the original? It did. It had the slightest bit of that too. Or at least it does at the moment, as carried. So this is working in the same way as actually it's a little bit tighter now. Let me see if I can get that a little bit more dialed in. This is the area where I always feel slightly awkward, right? About, as I'm filming these disassemblies, I could go, play with it off camera for a while. That sounds pretty wrong, actually. And maybe get things in a slightly better position, but I feel like there's some value to doing some of the troubleshooting here online. Okay, that's just barely detectable, and if I'm holding the blade, not meaningful. Side to side, no problems. The actual action is quite good. Centering it's very, very tight, maybe slightly favoring the clip side. Let me try and release the tension back here and then tighten it down again. Now that I have the pivot fully in place. Centering is now pretty damn close. Do we have vertical play again? Just the slightest bit. Okay. Interesting. Well, the knife is running beautifully now. And there's no danger here. I mean, Yeah, there's no issue here. It's not going to come unlocked. It's just the slightest bit of weird wiggle, and that could just be the nature of this lock. So, all right, but knife is running great. The deployment is good. Yeah. Did my centering come back out a little bit? No, it's just a little tiny bit off. Is it? It's hard to tell whether it's because the blade is a little uneven. Is the grind identical? The grind actually looks a little bit favoring... Is it favoring this side a little bit? Either way, this is close enough to centered that I don't really care. And we are done here. So there you go. That is the disassembly here for the Sandrin Torino. Very sort of interesting. But anyways, there we go. Hope this has been interesting to you, and have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of your day. Bye now.